Can you debug Docker containers with Versus Code? Have you ever wondered if you can debug Docker containers using Visual Studio Code? Well, you are in for a treat because the answer is yes. Visual Studio Code, often referred to as Versus Code, offers robust support for debugging applications that run inside Docker containers. This feature is made possible through the Container Tools extension and specific debug configurations that integrate Docker with the debugging environment of Versus Code. Let's break down how this works. First, you will need the Container Tools extension. This extension helps you set up necessary configuration files like Dockerfiles, tasks.json for build and run tasks, and launch.json for debugger launch configurations. These files are essential for getting everything in sync. Next, you will need to configure your launch.json file with a debug type set to Docker. This setup tells Versus Code how to launch or attach the debugger to your application running inside the container. The debug provider supports various platforms including Node.js, Python, and Net, making it versatile for different programming needs. To debug effectively, you will need a few key files. The Dockerfile defines the container image, while the tasks.json file specifies Docker build and Docker run tasks. The launch configuration will invoke these tasks. If you do not have these files, you can use Versus Code commands like containers, add Docker files to workspace and containers, initialize for container debugging to generate them automatically. Now, let's talk about language-specific support. For Node.js applications, Versus Code allows you to attach the debugger to the running container process. If you are working with Python, you can configure container entry points in tasks.json and set the appropriate launch configurations. For Net applications, the Docker tools in Versus Code provide built-in support for building and debugging container images, including scaffolding Dockerfiles and integrating the Net debugger. When it comes to debugging, you have two options. You can either launch a containerized application with debugging enabled or attach the debugger to an already running container. If you choose to attach, you will need to specify the debugger path inside the container. In a practical workflow, you typically start by adding Docker files to your workspace. After that, you scaffold debug configurations. When you begin debugging, Versus Code builds the container image, runs the container with debugging enabled, and attaches the debugger to the application process inside the container. This setup allows you to set breakpoints, step through code, inspect variables, and fix bugs just as if the application were running locally. In summary, Visual Studio Code provides comprehensive tools and configurations to debug Docker containers effectively. By integrating container build and run tasks with debugger launch configurations, it streamlines the debugging process for containerized applications across popular programming languages. So, if you are working with Docker containers, you can confidently use Versus Code to troubleshoot and fix bugs in your applications.